Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine that feeling. An intense desire arises within you, almost like a spark, an urgency demanding passage. But before you can even understand it, or perhaps even savor it, another voice, cold and heavy, resonates within. You shouldn't. This is wrong. You don't deserve it. It's guilt that knot in your throat, the weight on your chest that so often prevents us from simply being. Why is it that desiring something, seeking what makes us vibrate, is frequently accompanied by this burden, this shadow? Welcome to Beyond the Unconscious. Our conversation today is a deep dive into a question that crosses all of us at some point in life. Is desiring truly a sin? Together, we will explore how psychoanalysis, especially Sigmund Freud's ideas about our fundamental triad, desires, guilt, and the painful cycles of repetition they can generate, can illuminate this internal conflict and help us find lighter, more conscious, and perhaps more liberating paths. If you've ever felt paralyzed by this internal battle, this video is a sincere invitation to reflection. Stay with us. At the heart of our inner life pulses a force that psychoanalysis with Sigmund Freud has helped us name desire. Not a superficial wanting, a fleeting wish, but something much deeper, a current that moves us. Think of desire as the great mainspring of our psyche. Freud called this force drive, or Trieb in German, a word that carries the idea of an impulse, a constant pressure. It's vital energy, a kind of internal engine that incessantly propels us. Imagine a hunger that is not satisfied only with daily bread, a thirst that seeks something beyond fresh water. This is the nature of the drive. It leads us to seek, to create, to connect, but also, at times, puts us on a collision course with the world and ourselves. It's important to understand. For Freud, desire in its origin is neither good nor bad. It simply is. It is not born with a label of right or wrong, sinful or virtuous. Think of it as the force of a river. It can irrigate the land and generate life, but it can also overflow and cause destruction. The issue is not in the force itself, but in how it flows and how we deal with its course. This primordial force seeks a satisfaction that, curiously, always seems to be one step ahead, linked to a fundamental lack that constitutes us. But if desire itself is this neutral force, why does it so often clothe itself in the heavy mantle of guilt? Why do we feel we are wrong to simply want? This is where another fundamental piece of our psyche comes into play. Internalized morality. This judging voice is not born with us. It is carefully constructed, brick by brick, throughout our history. Freud named this instance the superego. Imagine it as a severe guardian, an internal judge carrying an invisible rulebook. These rules are formed by the internalization of the norms, prohibitions, values, and ideals that we absorb from the earliest childhood. Who are the authors of this internal rulebook? Primarily our parents and caregivers, the first voices that told us yes or no. Then, school, culture, religion, society as a whole. We carry within us the echo of these voices, which tell us what we should and should not do, be, or crucially desire. Freud saw the superego as the quo to the Oedipus complex, the moment when the great prohibitions and identifications are established, shaping our moral compass, and, with it, our ability to feel a guilt that can be both a guide and a tyrant. We understand desire as this pulsating force, and the superego as our internalized moral code. But how exactly does this clash happen within us? To help us visualize this complex internal arena, Freud described three psychic instances that govern our mental life: the ID, the ego, and the superego. Think of them as characters in an internal play, each with its role. The ID is our most primitive part, the raw reservoir of drives. It operates entirely by the pleasure principle. It wants immediate satisfaction for all impulses, without regard for logic or consequences. It's the inner child who cries, "I want it now." On the other hand, as a constant counterpoint, is the superego, our moral agent. It represents the internalized rules and ideals that we strive to achieve. If the ID is pure desire, the superego is, often, pure restriction, always comparing us to an ideal of perfection, and ready to inundate us with guilt when it perceives a flaw or a desire it considers improper. It's a voice that can be so critical that it prevents us from moving forward. And who tries to balance this scale, mediate this intense tug-of-war? This is the fundamental role of the ego, our I. The ego operates by the reality principle. Its task is to be the negotiator between the passionate impulses of the ID, the severe demands of the superego, and the conditions of the external world. It seeks realistic and socially acceptable ways to satisfy the desires of the ID, without, however, offending the superego too much. It's an exhausting task, a constant search for balance that consumes much of our psychic energy. It is from this shock, this constant tension between the wanting of the ID and the duty imposed by the superego, with the ego trying to manage the conflict, that guilt is born. An emotion so human, so present, and sometimes so devastating. It is necessary to differentiate. There is guilt that we can call conscious or realistic, the one we feel when, in fact, we have done something that goes against our values or harmed someone. This guilt can be an engine for reflection and repair. But psychoanalysis alerts us to a much more treacherous form of guilt, unconscious guilt. This unconscious guilt is like a persistent shadow. It is diffuse, intense, and can arise even if we have done nothing wrong. The desire alone, the fantasy considered, quote, forbidden by our superego, is enough for it to settle in. How many times have we felt bad without knowing exactly why? Or have we caught ourselves repeating patterns of self-sabotage, as if we were punishing ourselves for something that didn't even happen on the plane of reality? This is the force of unconscious guilt, undermining our joy and our life force. Freud, in his work Civilization and Its Discontents, shows us that life in society itself requires us to renounce a part of our most immediate instinctual satisfactions. To coexist, we need to postpone, repress, transform many of our desires. This renunciation is the price of civilization, but it does not come without cost. One of these costs is the increased severity of the superego, and, consequently, the feeling of guilt, which becomes a constant companion on the human journey. If guilt is this consequence of our internal dynamics in life and society, what about desire itself? Is it the villain of the story? Psychoanalysis invites us to deeply question the idea that desire is inherently sinful. As we have seen, desire is a vital force, amoral in its origin. The clothing of sin is a cultural, moral, and religious garment that has been sewn over the centuries, and that we have worn since early on. Different cultures and eras have had, and have, very different ways of dealing with desires. Some celebrating their expression, others repressing them fiercely. What is considered a normal or transgressive desire varies immensely. The psychoanalytic gaze does not seek to judge desire, but to understand it. What is its function in our psychic life? What are its destinies? How does it transform, hide, reveal itself? How does it connect with our unique history, with our fears and our deepest aspirations? The question that resonates in the analyst's office is not, is this desire a sin? But rather, what does this desire say about you? Where does it come from? And what can you do with it to live a fuller life with less suffering? So if desire is not the problem in itself, why does it so often become a source of anguish, pain, unhappy repetitions? Here, the psychoanalytic answer is clear. Suffering does not reside in the act of desiring, but in the way we deal, or fail to deal, with the complexity of our desires and with the guilt they can arouse. Suffering arises, for example, from excessive repression. When the superego is an implacable tyrant, and the ego, intimidated, systematically denies the expression or even the recognition of important impulses, this energy does not disappear. It manifests itself in disguised forms, symptoms of anxiety, phobias, compulsions that imprison us, or that chronic sadness that seems to have no reason. On the other hand, the impulsive acting out of desires without any filter or reflection is also a road to suffering. When the ID takes total control and desires are fulfilled immediately, without considering the consequences for ourselves or others, the result can be a vicious cycle of self-destructive behaviors, chaotic relationships, and a deep feeling of emptiness. The momentary satisfaction of the impulse rarely fills the lack that is at the root of our desiring. That is why the distinction between desiring, fantasizing, and acting is so crucial. Fantasizing is a safe and necessary space. The problem is when the fantasy cannot be elaborated, or when the act becomes pure discharge, without consideration. If both blind repression and unbridled acting out lead us to repeat patterns of suffering, what would be the path to a more mature, more conscious relationship with this vital force that is desire? Psychoanalysis points to the importance of self-listening and self-knowledge. This means, first of all, creating an internal space of welcome to recognize our desires, without immediate judgment. It is allowing oneself to ask honestly, what do I really want? What is this will telling me? And, fundamentally, questioning the guilt that emerges. Is this critical voice that accuses me really mine, connected with who I am today? Or is it just the echo of old prohibitions that no longer make sense, but that continue to haunt me and make me repeat the same mistakes? The process of personal analysis psychoanalytic therapy is an invitation to this deep listening. It is a safe and confidential space where, with the help of a professional, we can unravel the severe mandates of our superego, understand the coded messages of our unconscious, and gradually flexibilize those rigid patterns of thought and behavior that make us suffer and repeat the same pains. It is not about eliminating the superego. It is necessary, but about making it a more understanding ally, less of an executioner. It is essential to understand this journey of self-knowledge does not seek an inconsequential liberation of desires, as if we could simply ignore the world and others. This would be just another form of acting out. The objective is much deeper and more transformative, to build a conscious and responsible integration between our desiring, our feeling, and our acting in the world. It is learning to make choices more aligned with who we really are, assuming responsibility for them. An ego that strengthens in this process, that has learned to dialogue with the different parts of itself, becomes more capable of mediating internal conflicts creatively. It can then find ways to seek satisfactions that are truly nourishing for the soul, that are in accordance with a personal ethic, an ethic of the singular desire of each one, not a universal morality imposed from the outside, and that are sustainable in the long term, both for us and for our relationships. From this perspective, desire ceases to be seen only as a threat, a source of sin and guilt, and comes to be recognized and experienced in all its power as an extraordinary source of vitality, creativity, pleasure, connection, and personal transformation. It is the engine that drives us to dream, to build, to love, to learn, and to become, step by step, the most authentic version of ourselves, breaking the cycles of repetition that imprison us. We have reached the end of our reflection today, and I hope that this journey through the psychoanalysis of desire and guilt has touched something important for you. We have seen that desiring is not a mistake, but an essential part of what makes us human. The conflict and guilt arise from the complex dance between our deepest drives and the rules we internalize. Psychoanalysis offers us a path to understand this dance, to alleviate the weight of unnecessary guilt, and to live our desires with more consciousness and responsible freedom, breaking the patterns of repetition that afflict us so much. How did this conversation resonate within you? What desires, guilts, or patterns of repetition were you able to identify in your own life from this exploration of ours? Share your reflections in the comments. Your experience enriches our community. If this content touched you, like, subscribe, and share with those who need to hear this. Until our next meeting here on Beyond the Unconscious.